The very first thing we need to do before we crack on with the section here is just to check the wine for condition. Wine, we've already talked about it, you can sometimes pick up an out of condition wine on the appearance. The most important place for picking it up, however, is actually on the nose itself. So before you swirl the glass, before you proceed with this part of the tasting, the systematic approach to tasting, just check the condition of the nose by having a quick sniff. What you're looking for is fresh fruit, of course. You don't want anything that you're not expecting. So the sort of things that might suggest a wine is faulty would be what we call TCA taint, or trichloroanisole taint, which is a damp, mouldy smell and is often the result of cork contamination. You've got excess sulfur dioxide as well, which can smell like burnt matches. You've got oxidation, which results in a dead wine, basically. It will smell fruitless, similar to Madeira or sherry, like dried fruit and nuts, basically. Oxidation is a complicated one because in some wines it's seen as added complexity. In other wines it's seen as a fault. If we were to get dried fruit or nut aromas in this particular wine, then we would consider that a fault. But in some wines, like the white Burgundy and the Greek white, then a slight oxidative note is actually seen as added complexity. And then the last one we've got two other faults as well that you should be aware of as well. One we call volatile acidity, which smells like nail varnish or nail polish, or vinegar. It's a bright acetic acid note on the nose. And then finally we've got one called Brettanomyces, which is a fungus that results in again very complex number of aromas in the wine, but generally it's sort of like a horsey note.
Yes, I
remember. Some people describe it as it can be quite medicinal as well, like a plaster, sticking plaster, so it's a difficult one, and one we might come across from time to time. I do have some examples here,
so you're
which might help.
The Brett there, sorry.
Brett, yes, yeah. They are all in the book. So do have a look through the book, which will give you more detail about them. So let's start with the easy one. So this is TCA.
This one, the Brett, can it be that I've smelled that in a cider?
Yes.
Because I didn't have the vocabulary to express what you say, so it was slightly different, but that was exactly what it was.
Yeah.
But a lot of it?
Yeah. So that's TCA. Commonly known as corktate, although often incorrect because you can get it from from sources other than cork. Are you getting that? Not everybody gets it. We all have different sensitivities to TCA. And some people really struggle to pick it up. Some people pick it up just like that. So, okay, this is excess SO2, so sulfur. This is a little bit harder. For me, this is more of a sensation. It makes a prickle on my nose. It's possibly sort of a bad egg smell.
I was going to say that. I associate it with rotten eggs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes when you go into a shoe shop with a lot of leather shoes and rubber.
Yes, exactly. Yes. No. See, and it will dissipate as well. So this one isn't always a problem. So once you actually open the glass and open the wine and you start pouring it into glasses, it will eventually dissipate as well. Then we've got oxidation. They describe it in this set as rotten apple. And I'm not sure that this is a really good example of it, but you'll know what rotten apples smells like. If you don't, leave an apple in your fruit bowl for a month or so.
Oh gosh, that freaks me. That's got a slack roof with the nail on it.
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
Yeah,
yeah. They are closely linked, so they are closely linked. Cool.
That was oxidation.
That was
I
oxidation.
didn't know about volatile. Is that oxidation or is that something?
It's a result of oxidation as well.
So
Yeah.
I think
So
the
they are.
oxidation,
So this one coming round is volatile acidity.
Oh, right.
Volatile acidity is linked to oxidation. So actually there are two, although volatile acidity is actually caused by bacteria, it's a combination of bacteria and oxidation. So it's complicated, but so this is volatile acidity. So this is vinegar.
But like, because I just think solidly no crisps.
Yes. Again, if you've ever put vinegar on your chips, you'll know exactly what vinegar smells like.
Last train back home, so it's not.
Thank you.
Okay. And then we've got, what did I say, Brett? So, which is this one, number 10, which again they describe as horse, rather unattractively.
What did you call it? Brett?
Brett. Brettanomyces is the name of the fungus.
This is exactly
The
what
yeast, it's a yeast.
what I had to drink.
That's not what you got.
Yes.
That
And
is,
then
yeah.
Stronger,
Yeah,
and a lot of it, so it was.
yeah.
Wasn't it?
This is the sort of thing that you find in natural wine, is Brettanomyces. So Brettanomyces, or I shorten it to Brett, is the name of the yeast that causes this particular aroma in wine. And yeah, well, yes, it does. Yeah,
And then
and you'll find this in again. It's controversial because in some wines this aroma is considered added complexity. It's not always considered a fault.
What wine is that?
So something like Chateauneuf de Pate, for example, very often has a very high level of this aroma, and it's actually considered to be okay.
I think I'd be curious to taste a wine that has some of it and not fire in it.
Yeah,
I think in context
yeah.
it could be nice
Well, we
to
might
drink.
get one. Hopefully,
Yes,
we'll
whereas
get one.
Just
So-
that, I think is very...
Yeah, yeah. The Southern Rhone, Brettanomyces is prevalent in wines of the Southern Rhone. So have a good old taste of things like Chateauneuf de Pate, for example, and you're bound to come across it at some stage. Okay. And then the comparisons for wines that haven't got it would be Australian wines. The Australians hate Brettanomyces and will do whatever they can to make sure it's nowhere near any of their wines. So compare Southern Rhones to Australian Shirazes and Syrahs, and that hopefully that distinction will become clearer. But we might, if we come across them in class, I'll point them out to you. Okay.
Is it the TCA that comes from a chemical in actual cork?
It's a combination. It's a fungus that lives in a combination of a fungus that lives in the cork bark, and chlorine chemicals that are used during the manufacturing process. So the cork production people have to be very, very careful to avoid this interaction between the two things. So they've almost eradicated it by not using chlorine-based cleaning products anymore. So you get
That's actually mounted as fruit up, isn't it?
exactly. You shouldn't. You can still get it because there are other sources of the fungus and of the cleaning chemicals, but you should get much less with screw cap. I've had TCA in bag-in-box before, so you can get it, but yeah. Right, Right, okay, so once you check the wine that it's in good condition, that it's clean, and you've made a note of that, so if it's clean, say it's clean. If it's unclean, say why, what you think the fault might be. But you won't get any marks for that in the exam, because I will always give you a fault-free wine. I won't give you a faulty wine. I check it before thoroughly to make sure it's not faulty. Okay, so we've checked for faults. We haven't got any of those. So now we can give the glass a nice big positive swirl. This helps to release the aromas so that we can get a better, make a better assessment of the intensity, the aroma characteristics, and the development of the wine. So the first thing I need you to do is to describe whether you think the intensity of the aromas is light, medium, or pronounced. What do you think? Pronounced. I'd actually go light on this one, and I'll hopefully the next wine will show you what I mean. So I would be going light on this particular one. There's not, if you another way of doing it is by sort of gradually moving the glass up to your nose, and if you get to about here and you still can't smell it and you actually have to sniff really hard, then it's probably light. If you're about here and you can smell it, it's pronounced. Okay. So I would go light on this one. You'll notice that we've also got medium minus and medium plus to consider as well. Medium, if you decide that the wine is of medium intensity, then you need to have a little extra think and decide to yourself, actually, is it medium minus or is it medium plus, or is it strictly medium? Okay, so just have a think about that. If you decide it's medium, then decide whether actually it's going to be medium plus or whether it's medium minus as well. Okay, right, so the next thing we do is make an assessment of the aroma characteristics. Aroma characteristics can help us identify the grape variety. It can help us identify certain winemaking techniques that might be used. It can also, and probably most importantly, help us identify the development of the wine as well. Okay, so what we need to do is to split our aroma characteristics into three. What we call primary, what we call secondary, and what we call tertiary aroma characteristics. Primary characteristics are fresh fruit. Okay, so anything that's fresh fruit or fresh vegetables or floral characteristics, these are all primary characteristics and have come from the grape itself. Okay, so these have actually come from the grape and the fermentation process itself. Secondary characteristics are anything that has come from the winemaking process. So if, for example, you get butter notes in your wine, that suggests malolactic fermentation. We'll talk more about the detail of these techniques in a couple of weeks' time. If you get vanilla, for example, or coffee, that might suggest the use of oak in the wine. These are all what we would call secondary aroma characteristics. And then finally, tertiary characteristics are the result of development. These come from bottle age. Okay, these might be dried fruit notes, for example, might be honey as well, could be meaty notes as well. And on the back of your card is what they call the lexicon. And they've split up a load and given you examples of a load of aroma characteristics and flavour characteristics that you are likely to come across in wine. And I would suggest sticking to this. Don't try and be any more creative than what's on this list, unless it's coming to you just like that. Okay. So you can see here you've got primary aromas and flavours, then you've got secondary aromas and flavours, and then finally you've got tertiary aromas and flavours to use. So what are we going to go for in this particular wine? Are there any primary aromas?
Yes.
Yes. Are there any secondary aromas? No. Okay. Are there any tertiary aromas? No. Okay. I completely agree with you. This is 100% primary. Okay, so we've absolutely just got primary aromas in here. So let's have a look at the primary aroma box. And what do we think? Any suggestions for examples in there?
I thought a green apple, like a granny
Green
smell.
apple, perfect. Everybody write green apple down. Good. Anything else?
I'm going to burn the lemon. Elderflower?
Elderflower, yes, I think so. Yeah, we can definitely say floral. I'm not sure whether we can be...
I've got an elderflower bush in the garden.
Right,
so
okay.
I'm clean, no severe knowledge on it.
Yeah.
But it just, there's
Okay,
something there.
let's go for it then. Fine, elderflower. Yeah, right, elderflower down.
I wouldn't know what acacia smells like.
A what? Acacia. No, and that's a really important point to make. If you don't know what it smells like, don't use
Definitely
it.
just
Yeah, it's it's got to work for you. But it's quite interesting. We're going through interesting times at the moment because as more and more people taste wine and get into wine, we're having to deal with a whole load of differences with cultures and different people eating different things in different parts of the world. The Chinese, for example, complete headache because they have a completely different set of fruit and vegetables to what we do. So it makes describing wine to the Chinese very difficult because we're used to speaking the way we speak and haven't learned to speak the way they speak just yet. Okay, so I think that's good. So we've got apple, we've got elderflower. I might throw in lemon as well. So let's throw in some lemon. I'm going to suggest a touch of yeastiness. So I think, but this is because I know exactly what this wine is, and I'll tell you what the wine is in a minute, but there is a touch of yeasty character in here. So I think we could throw in a secondary aroma that is yeast. If you think about opening a packet of dried yeast, making bread, you open a packet of that sort of easy blend, dry yeasty stuff. You've got a little bit of an aroma like that in here. Again, that is a function of the way that this particular wine is made, which I'll tell you about in more detail at some stage. Okay, cool. So that's it. So for your aroma characteristics, again, in the exam, you will get 5 marks for aroma characteristics. So you will be expected to write down at least one primary aroma characteristic, and then four others. So if you're only getting, not making this particularly clear, so and we've got a secondary one as well actually. So what you would need to write down would be your key primary characteristics, which I would say would be green apple. So you write down green apple. Then you write down yeast, which would be your secondary characteristic. And then you need to find 3 more characteristics in order to make up your marks to 5. Okay, so I would suggest we've got elderflower. What else do we have? Lemon. And then we need to find another one. I would possibly say you could say gooseberry. I think there's very possibly some gooseberry in here.
Do you have to specify which is primary and which is secondary?
No. No, the examiner will know what you're talking about. Don't worry about it.
Leave it there.
But if there was no secondary, you're just looking at 5 primaries.
If there was no secondary, then you would probably need to say something like simple. In order, well, it'll become clear as we get more and more examples of the type. Okay. If you were just to state the nature of the fruit, you would get a mark for that as well. So you could just say simple, and then you would only need to find 3 categories because you get a mark for simple. Does that make sense? It will make sense, don't worry. There are also worked examples on the Dropbox folder as well. So have a look through those too at some
So
stage.
simple is just primary characteristics.
Simple is just a way to describe the nature of the wine. So if you think the wine is simple, and by the time we finish the course you'll know exactly when to describe a wine as simple, then all you need to do is find 4 other aroma characteristics to help you describe that wine in order to achieve the marks. Okay, so now we are able to make an assessment of the development of that wine. If we've got tertiary notes, so if we have listed some tertiary notes here, then we will be able to say that the wine is developing. Okay. But our wine has only got primary and a tiny, tiny bit of secondary aroma characteristics in it, so therefore we can determine that the wine is youthful. Okay. If the wine has only got tertiary aroma characteristics, then we would describe the wine as fully developed. It is really rare that you will come across one of those. It would have to be a very old wine to be fully developed. Okay. If it is completely lacking in fruit, primary fruit, then it would be considered tired and passed its best.
Would we get deliberately faulted wines in our exams?
No. And you won't get a fully developed one either. Okay, so it's really only these 2 that you'll have to worry about. Okay, so we should have light intensity, we should have the primary characteristics of, what did we say, lemon, lime, apple, elderflower, gooseberry, and then the secondary characteristic of yeast. And then finally, our development should be youthful. We'll taste it in a minute, I promise. Okay, so now we get to assess the palate. What you need to do here